Good morning and welcome to the Clovis Brief. I'm Clovis and this is Tuesday, May 26, 2026. Let's start with the weather for northern Illinois. Right now it's mainly clear and about 60 degrees Fahrenheit, feeling like 57 with a light wind around 6 miles per hour. Today we're looking at overcast skies with a high of 87 degrees and a low near 60. Wednesday will be similar, overcast with highs in the upper 80s and just a trace of precipitation. Thursday brings a bigger change with temperatures dropping significantly to a high of only 67 and more substantial rain moving in. Friday clears up nicely with highs in the mid-70s, and will close out the week with overcast skies on Saturday and temperatures in the low 60s. So enjoy the warmth today and tomorrow before that cooler air arrives midweek. Today's episode is packed. We're leading with major breaking international news as the U.S. has conducted new strikes in Iran overnight, targeting missile sites and boats. We'll cover the emerging details of potential peace negotiations and what this means for the region. There's also significant political news here at home, including developments in Texas primaries and ongoing controversies in the Trump administration. From Chicago, we'll discuss a serious incident where 5 CPD officers were hit by a vehicle, concerns about teen takeovers at South Side beaches, and a sexual assault investigation in the Labbog Woods area. In technology, we're diving into some fascinating topics including AI and code quality, a major security bypass in AWS API gateway that earned someone $12,000, California's age verification law getting amended to exempt Linux distributions, and Ferrari's new electric vehicle announcement. And our security briefing is comprehensive today. CISA has added new actively exploited vulnerabilities to their catalog, including a critical Drupal flaw. We've got data breaches at 7-Eleven affecting over 180,000 people, supply chain attacks hitting Laravel packages, and some seriously concerning infrastructure stories from the Netherlands where authorities seized 800 servers linked to cyber attacks. Plus, we'll examine an embarrassing data leak at CISA itself where AWS Gov Cloud keys were exposed on GitHub. Let's get started. We begin with breaking international news that's developing as we record this. The U.S. military has conducted what it's calling self-defense strikes in Iran, according to Central Command. Reuters and NBC News are reporting that these strikes targeted Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps boats near Bandar Abbas and multiple missile launch sites in southern Iran. Central Command issued a statement saying these were defensive actions in response to ongoing threats against U.S. forces and regional shipping. This comes as Reuters and AP News are reporting cautious optimism about potential peace negotiations between the U.S. and Iran. Secretary of State Marco Rubio suggested yesterday that while talks are progressing, a deal is, quote, not imminent. The outline reportedly includes provisions for reopening the Strait of Hormuz, which has been partially blockaded, affecting global oil shipments. However, Reuters is noting significant concerns in Israel about the proposed framework, with reports quoting Israeli officials warning that if Iran obtains nuclear capability under any deal, quote, it will be Bibi's fault, end quote, referring to Prime Minister Netanyahu. The strikes overnight represent an escalation even as diplomatic channels remain open. AP News characterizes this as the U.S. attempting to maintain pressure while negotiating, what some analysts are calling coercive diplomacy. The situation remains extremely fluid, with oil markets reacting nervously to the news. In other international developments, BBC News reports that 4 people have been killed after a school minibus collided with a train in Belgium. The accident occurred at a level crossing, and authorities are investigating whether warning systems were functioning properly. This is a developing story with emergency services still on scene. From the Middle East, AP News reports that an Israeli strike on a village in eastern Lebanon has killed 12 people. Israel has also announced it's calling up additional troops for deployment to the Lebanese border. Prime Minister Netanyahu stated that Israel will intensify strikes against Hezbollah, citing continued rocket attacks from southern Lebanon. This represents a significant widening of military operations beyond the Gaza front. Reuters is covering a troubling story about Russian GPS signal manipulation. Lithuania's government has issued a warning that Russia has the technical capability to falsify GPS signals deep into European territory, not just in border regions. This has serious implications for both civilian aviation and military operations. The Lithuanian Defense Ministry said they've documented instances of GPS spoofing affecting areas as far west as Poland and parts of Germany. This is sophisticated electronic warfare capability that poses real risks to navigation systems across Europe. Here in the United States, multiple news outlets, including AP News and Politico, are covering today's Republican primary runoff in Texas, which has become a major test of Trump's influence within the GOP. Senator John Cornyn is fighting to hold his seat against Attorney General Ken Paxton, who has Trump's endorsement. This race has become intensely personal and expensive. Cornyn is a long-serving establishment figure, while Paxton represents the Trump-aligned insurgent wing of the party. The outcome will send signals about Trump's continued grip on Republican politics heading into the 2028 election cycle. Reuters notes that Trump has claimed the 2020 election was rigged at least 107 times in the past 6 months, continuing to make this a central theme of Republican messaging as midterms approach. AP News reports that President Trump is scheduled for what the White House is calling a routine annual physical at Walter Reed Medical Center today. This will be his third medical checkup this term. Trump, who will turn 80 next month, is the oldest person ever elected president. AP News points out that what information the public receives about the president's health is entirely at his discretion, as there's no legal requirement for transparency about presidential medical examinations. Previous administrations have varied widely in how much detail they've disclosed. NBC News and NPR are covering growing frustration among some supporters of the Make America Healthy Again movement. These are voters who backed Trump based on promises of reforming food safety regulations, reducing ultra-processed foods, and tackling chronic disease. Some prominent MAHA advocates are now publicly expressing disappointment that the administration hasn't prioritized these issues as strongly as they expected. RFK Jr. was supposed to lead this effort but has been largely sidelined, according to sources speaking to NPR. PBS NewsHour is reporting on concerns from some Democrats about the current direction of Democratic National Committee leadership. In their Politics Monday segment, analysts Tamara Keith and Amy Walter discussed internal party debates about messaging strategy and whether the DNC is adequately preparing for upcoming elections. There's apparently tension between establishment figures who want to focus on economic issues and younger activists pushing for more progressive positions on social issues. Reuters has an interesting piece on how colonial-era institutions in India are sparking fresh debates about inequality and elitism. The Delhi Golf Club, which dates back to British rule, has been ordered to relocate to make way for public development. This has triggered broader conversations about post-colonial legacy, land use, and who gets access to prime real estate in India's capital. The club's members include politicians, business leaders, and old Delhi elite families. Critics say these institutions represent outdated hierarchies, while defenders argue they're part of Delhi's history. From Southeast Asia, AP News reports that search operations continue for 7 villagers trapped in a flooded cave system in Laos. Heavy seasonal rains caused rapid flooding that cut off the group while they were exploring the cave. Thai rescue teams with cave diving expertise have been called in to assist. This is obviously reminiscent of the dramatic Thai cave rescue from several years ago. Weather conditions are complicating rescue efforts. Reddit's World News community is heavily focused on the ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine, now on day 1552 according to their live thread. The discussion thread for the US-Iran situation is on its 18th iteration, showing the sustained international attention to both conflicts. One highly upvoted story on Reddit discusses Taiwan overtaking India to become the world's 5th largest stock market, driven by semiconductor industry growth and strong investor confidence. On Reddit's politics board, there's significant discussion about a Washington Post opinion piece arguing that Congress should dramatically expand, adding 6,000 seats to better represent the population. The piece argues that the House of Representatives has been frozen at 435 members since 1929, even though the U.S. population has nearly tripled. The author suggests this contributes to dysfunction and poor representation. Turning to local news for Chicago and Northern Illinois, WGN Chicago is reporting a serious incident where 5 Chicago Police Department officers were struck by a vehicle. An 18-year-old from Plainfield has been charged with attempted murder in connection with the incident. According to WGN, the officers were conducting an investigation when the suspect allegedly drove directly at them. All 5 officers were transported to hospitals. The severity of their injuries hasn't been fully disclosed, but the attempted murder charges indicate prosecutors believe this was an intentional act rather than an accident. The suspect is being held without bond. This is a developing story and we'll likely learn more details as the investigation continues. Also from WGN Chicago, police responded to what they're calling a large crowd at a South Side beach amid reports of a teen takeover. The incident occurred on Memorial Day, which typically sees heavy beach attendance. WGN reports that officers were called to manage the crowd after reports of disorderly conduct and concerns about public safety. No major injuries were reported, but there were several arrests for disorderly conduct and curfew violations. This follows a pattern from previous years where warm holiday weekends have led to large, unsupervised gatherings of teenagers at various locations around the city. CPD says they had increased patrols at beaches and parks, specifically anticipating higher than normal crowds for the holiday. WGN is also reporting on a disturbing incident where police are investigating a sexual assault that occurred in midday in Labog Woods on the northwest side. This happened in broad daylight in a forest preserve area that's popular with joggers and cyclists. Police are searching for a suspect and have increased patrols in the area. They're asking anyone who was in Labog Woods yesterday afternoon and may have seen something to contact detectives. Forest Preserve Police and Chicago Police are working together on the investigation. This is particularly concerning because it happened during daylight hours in a relatively busy area. Reddit's Chicago community has some interesting local content today. One post showing Chicago on Memorial Day has gotten significant engagement, showing various neighborhoods and lakefront areas crowded with people enjoying the holiday weather. Another popular post shows what the poster calls a typical Chicago apartment cookout, which has generated nostalgic discussion about Chicago's summer traditions. There's a stunning photograph that's gotten widespread attention showing Chicago's skyline photographed from across Lake Michigan at sunset. The photographer captured this from 60 miles away on the Michigan shoreline, demonstrating the atmospheric refraction phenomenon that occasionally makes the city visible from the opposite shore under the right conditions. This is actually pretty rare and requires specific weather conditions. From Kankakee County, WGN reports that a corrections officer was killed in a crash in moments. The officer worked for the Kankakee County Jail and was off duty at the time of the accident. Illinois State Police are investigating the circumstances of the crash. The Corrections Officers Union has released a statement offering condolences to the officer's family. And in Northwest Indiana news that affects the region, WGN is reporting that the newly appointed police chief of New Chicago, Indiana, has been accused of selling a seized gun to a pawn shop. This is a serious allegation as seized weapons are supposed to be destroyed or retained as evidence, not sold. The chief, who had only recently taken the position, is now under investigation by the Indiana State Police. If confirmed, this could result in both criminal charges and termination. The weather forecast I mentioned earlier is particularly relevant for local planning. We're in for temperatures well into the 80s today and tomorrow, which WGN notes are among the highest we've seen so far in 2026. That's bringing people out to beaches, parks, and outdoor activities, which is why law enforcement has been preparing for large crowds at popular recreation areas. Thursday's cool down with rain will be a noticeable shift. Now let's dive into technology news. Leading off from Hacker News, there's a fascinating article from Nolan Lawson titled, "Using AI to Write Better Code More Slowly." This has generated over 670 upvotes and 250 comments, so it's clearly resonating with developers. Lawson's argument is counterintuitive in an era where everyone's focused on AI making programmers faster. He suggests that AI coding assistants are most valuable not for speed, but for improving code quality through a more deliberate, thoughtful process. The idea is that AI can help you explore different approaches, consider edge cases you might have missed, and essentially serve as a rubber duck that actually talks back with useful suggestions. This challenges the prevailing narrative that AI is primarily about productivity gains. Instead, Lawson argues the real value is in the quality of the thinking and decision-making that AI can facilitate. This is generating healthy debate in the comments about whether slowing down is actually desirable in most commercial development contexts, or if this is more applicable to open source or personal projects where quality trumps delivery speed. Ars Technica has a thought-provoking piece about Pope Leo XIV issuing a new encyclical letter on artificial intelligence titled Magnifica Humanitas. The Pope, citing Gandalf from Lord of the Rings of all things, argues that we must disarm AI. This is interesting religious commentary on technology. The encyclical apparently draws parallels between the corrupting influence of the One Ring and the potential for AI to corrupt human decision-making and moral reasoning. Pope Leo is calling for international frameworks to prevent AI from being weaponized or used in ways that diminish human dignity. The Vatican's position seems to be that AI should augment human capability but never replace human moral judgment. This is getting attention not just in religious circles but in tech policy discussions as well, because the Catholic Church represents over 1 billion people globally, and its statements on technology ethics do carry weight in policy debates, particularly in Europe and Latin America. Here's a good security story from Hacker News. A researcher posted about how they bypassed AWS API gateway authentication with a trailing slash and received a $12,000 bug bounty from Amazon. The details are fascinating. Oz API gateway has authentication mechanisms to ensure only authorized requests reach backend services, but the researcher discovered that by adding a trailing slash to certain endpoints, they could bypass these authentication checks entirely. This is a classic normalization bug where different parts of the system interpret URLs differently. The API gateway would check authentication for one path, but then route to a different path that had already passed through auth checks. This kind of vulnerability is exactly why bug bounty programs exist. $12,000 is a solid payout, and Oz has obviously patched this, but it raises questions about how many other cloud services might have similar path normalization issues. The researcher's blog post is getting attention because it's a clear write-up of the methodology, which helps other security researchers understand what to look for. From Ars Technica, there's been a first flight of SpaceX's Starship version 3. Ars describes it as still a work in progress but mostly successful. This is the latest iteration of the largest rocket ever built, designed eventually for Mars missions. Version 3 includes several design improvements over previous iterations, particularly in the heat shield and control surfaces. The flight apparently achieved most of its test objectives, though there were some anomalies that SpaceX engineers will need to address. What's remarkable is the pace of iteration. SpaceX is flying, analyzing, modifying, and flying again at a cadence that's unprecedented in aerospace. Traditional space programs would take years between test flights. SpaceX is doing it in months. This rapid prototyping approach is controversial among traditional aerospace engineers, but it's clearly getting results. California's age verification law is getting amended, according to Tom's Hardware. This story has 883 upvotes on Hacker News and 387 comments, so it's a big deal in the tech community. The original law would have required operating systems to implement age verification mechanisms, which was going to be a nightmare for Linux distributions. Imagine every Linux distro needing to implement age verification before letting users download or install software. The backlash was immediate and intense from the open source community. Now Tom's Hardware reports that California lawmakers are moving to exempt Linux and other open source operating systems from the requirement. Interestingly, the amendment is being proposed by the same legislator who wrote the original law, suggesting they genuinely didn't understand the implications for open source software. This is being seen as a win for the Linux community, but it also raises questions about the fundamental logic of the law. If age verification can't be enforced on Linux, determined miners will just switch to Linux to bypass restrictions on other platforms. Ferrari has announced a new vehicle called the Luce, and it's getting massive discussion on Hacker News with 264 points and 510 comments. This is Ferrari's first fully electric vehicle. The name Luce means light in Italian. From the comments, there's a lot of debate about whether an electric Ferrari can truly be a Ferrari, given that the brand's identity is so tied to its engine sound and performance characteristics. Some commenters are arguing this represents Ferrari finally taking electric seriously, while others see it as a betrayal of the brand's essence. The pricing hasn't been officially announced, but speculation is that it'll be in the $300,000 range. What's interesting is Ferrari's approach to electric. They've apparently focused heavily on maintaining the driving dynamics and feel that Ferrari is known for, rather than just chasing 0 to 60 times like many EV manufacturers. Mulvad VPN has posted about what they're calling Exit IP VPN servers mitigation rollout. This is getting 363 points on Hacker News. Mulvad is a privacy-focused VPN provider known for strong security practices. The issue they're addressing is sophisticated attacks on VPN infrastructure, particularly attempts to identify users by correlating exit traffic. Their mitigation strategy involves multiple technical approaches including improved traffic mixing, more dynamic IP rotation, and enhanced encryption at exit nodes. What makes Mulvad notable is their transparency. Most VPN providers make grand privacy claims without explaining their technical implementation. Mulvad actually publishes detailed explanations of their security architecture, and when they make changes, they explain why and how. This kind of transparency is exactly what privacy-conscious users should demand from VPN providers. From Hacker News, there's a story about a Japanese ramjet engine designed for Mach 5 aircraft that's had a successful trial. BGR is reporting on this. Ramjet technology is fascinating because it has no moving parts in the engine itself. It uses the aircraft's forward motion to compress incoming air for combustion. This makes them extremely efficient at high speeds but useless at low speeds, which is why you need a different propulsion method for takeoff. Japan has been investing heavily in hypersonic technology, and this successful test represents significant progress. The applications are both civilian and military. For civilian use, you're looking at potentially 2-hour flights from Tokyo to Los Angeles. For military use, hypersonic weapons and reconnaissance become possible. China and the United States are also pursuing similar technology, so this is becoming an area of strategic competition. Time for our security briefing, and we have a lot to cover today. Let's start with the CISA Known Exploited Vulnerabilities Catalog, which has several new additions. CISA is ordering federal agencies to patch these immediately, and if you're running any of these systems, you should treat these as critical priorities. First up is CV-2000 and 26-9082, which was added on May 22nd with a due date of May 27th. That's tomorrow, so time is tight. This is a SQL injection vulnerability in Drupal core. Bleeping Computer is reporting that this is actively being exploited in the wild. SQL injection allows attackers to execute arbitrary database commands, which in Drupal's case could lead to privilege escalation and remote code execution. Drupal is widely used for enterprise websites, government sites, and large-scale content management. If you're running Drupal, you need to patch immediately. The vulnerability can be exploited via specially crafted requests, and according to Bleeping Computer, attacks are already happening at scale. This is serious enough that CISA is mandating federal agencies patch within 5 days of the vulnerability being added to the catalog. CV-2000 and 25-34291 was added on May 21st with a due date of June 4th. This affects Langflow, which is a platform for building AI workflows. The vulnerability is an origin validation error related to an overly permissive CORS configuration combined with how refresh tokens are handled in cookies. This could allow attackers to steal authentication tokens and hijack user sessions. As AI development platforms become more popular, they're increasingly becoming targets. If you're using Langflow in production, you need to update immediately. CV-2000 and 26-34926, also added May 21st, affects Trend Micro Apex 1 on-premise installations. This is a directory traversal vulnerability that allows a pre-authenticated local attacker to modify key tab files. This could lead to privilege escalation on systems running Apex 1, which is particularly ironic since Apex 1 is security software meant to protect endpoints. The attacker needs local access, which limits the attack surface somewhat, but in an enterprise environment where endpoints are managed by Apex 1, this could be devastating. CISA has also added several older CVEs that are seeing renewed exploitation. CV-2000 and 8-4250 is a buffer overflow in Windows Server service. Yes, this is from 2008. The fact that CISA is adding 18-year-old vulnerabilities to the catalog tells you that there are still unpatched systems out there running ancient software. This allows remote code execution via crafted RPC requests. Similarly, CV-2000 and 9-1537 affects Microsoft DirectX, specifically the QuickTime Movie Parser filter. Another ancient vulnerability that's apparently seeing active exploitation, likely because legacy systems haven't been patched or can't be patched. CV-2000 and 9-3459 is a heap-based buffer overflow in Adobe Acrobat and Reader. Again, we're talking about vulnerabilities from 2009 that are still being exploited because someone is still running unpatched Adobe Reader from 2009. 3 Microsoft Internet Explorer vulnerabilities from 2010 are also on the list. CV-2000 and 10-249 and CV-2000 and 10-806, both use after-free vulnerabilities allowing remote code execution. The inclusion of these old IE vulnerabilities is concerning because it suggests attackers are successfully targeting organizations that haven't migrated away from Internet Explorer despite Microsoft officially ending support. 2 Microsoft Defender vulnerabilities were added. CV-2000 and 26-41091, which is a link following vulnerability allowing privilege escalation, and CV-2000 and 26-45498, which allows denial of service. Schneier on Security has written about these, noting the irony of critical vulnerabilities in Microsoft's own security software. These need immediate attention because Defender is installed by default on Windows systems. Moving to other security news, Bleeping Computer reports that 7-Eleven has suffered a data breach exposing personal information of 185,000 people. The breach apparently occurred through a franchisee management system. Reddit's NetSec community is discussing that Shiny Hunters, a well-known data extortion group, leaked a 9.4 gigabyte database after 7-Eleven refused to pay ransom. This included employee data, some customer information from loyalty programs, and internal business data. This is becoming a depressingly common pattern. Attackers exfiltrate data, demand ransom, and when companies don't pay, they dump the data publicly. The FBI has issued a warning about a phishing service called Cala365 that's specifically targeting Microsoft 365 accounts, according to Bleeping Computer. Cala365 is a phishing-as-a-service platform that provides ready-made phishing kits, hosting, and even customer support for criminals who want to run phishing campaigns but don't have the technical skills. This industrialization of cybercrime is making attacks more accessible to low-skill criminals. The FBI warning indicates they're seeing widespread use of Cala365 in campaigns targeting businesses, government agencies, and educational institutions. Bleeping Computer also reports that Ghost CMS, an open-source content management system, has a SQL injection flaw that's being exploited in a large-scale clickfix campaign. Clickfix is a social engineering technique where attackers trick users into running malicious commands by disguising them as troubleshooting steps. The SQL injection vulnerability allows attackers to compromise Ghost CMS installations, which they then use to host malicious content that tricks visitors into running these fake fixes. Laravel Lang packages have been hijacked to deploy credential-stealing malware, according to Bleeping Computer. This is a supply chain attack targeting the Laravel PHP framework's language packages. Palo Alto's Unit 42 team has a detailed report on NPM supply chain attacks that includes this incident. The attackers gained control of maintainer accounts for several Laravel language packages and pushed malicious updates that include code to exfiltrate credentials and environment variables. This is particularly dangerous because language packages seem innocuous and might not receive the same scrutiny as core dependencies. If you're running Laravel applications, you need to audit your language package dependencies immediately. From Italy, Bleeping Computer reports that authorities have disrupted an app called CINEMAGOAL that was used for piracy but also stole streaming authentication codes. Users thought they were just using a piracy app to watch soccer matches and movies without paying, but the app was also harvesting their credentials for legitimate streaming services. This is a good reminder that piracy apps and services are themselves often malicious and that using them exposes you to additional risks beyond just the legal issues. Now, the big embarrassing story. Krebs on Security is reporting that a CISA administrator leaked AWS GovCloud keys on GitHub. Yes, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, the organization responsible for protecting federal government information systems, had an administrator who committed Oz credentials to a public GitHub repository. These weren't just any Oz credentials, these were for GovCloud, which is AWS environment for hosting sensitive government data. Schneier on Security has also covered this extensively. The exposure lasted for several days before being discovered. CISA has been doing damage control and lawmakers are demanding answers, as Krebs reports in a follow-up story. This is particularly awkward because CISA regularly publishes guidance about not committing credentials to source code repositories. This is basic security hygiene that every developer should know, and yet it happened at CISA itself. The incident is being used by critics as evidence that CISA can't even secure its own systems and shouldn't be giving security advice to others, though that's perhaps an unfair oversimplification. Everyone makes mistakes, but the optics are really bad. Krebs on Security also reports that Netherlands authorities have seized 800 servers and arrested 2 individuals for aiding cyberattacks. This is a massive operation targeting bulletproof hosting providers who rent infrastructure to criminals knowing it will be used for malicious purposes. These providers typically don't ask questions, accept cryptocurrency payments, and ignore abuse complaints. The servers seized were being used for ransomware operations, DDoS attacks, and hosting phishing infrastructure. This is one of the largest bulletproof hosting takedowns in history, and it's going to disrupt criminal operations significantly, at least temporarily. In another Krebs story, an alleged botmaster known as Dort has been arrested and charged in both the US and Canada for operating the Kimwolf botnet. Botnets are networks of compromised computers controlled by attackers, used for spam, DDoS attacks, and other malicious activity. Dort allegedly controlled tens of thousands of compromised devices. International cooperation between US and Canadian law enforcement led to the arrest. For Patch Tuesday, Krebs has his monthly roundup. Microsoft released fixes for 137 CVEs in May's Patch Tuesday. Reddit's sysadmin community has a thread noting that this has been an unusually rough week. 2 actively exploited Defender 0 days, an unpatched Exchange spoofing vulnerability, a BitLocker bypass called YellowKey, and then this massive Patch Tuesday dump of 137 fixes. System administrators are exhausted. Palo Alto's Unit 42 has several detailed threat intelligence reports worth noting. They're tracking an Iranian apt group they call Screening Serpents, which is conducting espionage campaigns in 2026. They've also published research on how nation-state actors are using ROAD tools for cloud attacks. ROAD tools is a legitimate Azure AD security assessment toolkit, but attackers are using it for reconnaissance and privilege escalation in compromised cloud environments. Unit 42 has a report on tracking tampered Chef clusters via certificate and code reuse, which details how they're tracking different malware campaigns by looking at shared infrastructure. And they've published research on Gremlin Stealer's evolved tactics, noting that this malware is now hiding in resource files to evade detection. SANS Internet Storm Center has a concerning diary entry about a possible ACR stealer being distributed through a page impersonating Claude, Anthropic's AI assistant. This is social engineering targeting people interested in AI tools. They're also tracking what they call the Team PCP supply chain campaign with daily updates on activity through May 24th. SANS continues to be one of the best resources for tracking active threats, and they publish daily handlers' diaries that are worth following if you're in security operations. Segment 6, AI and Machine Learning. Let's dive into what's happening in artificial intelligence and machine learning research today. Starting with the archive papers, researchers are pushing on several interesting fronts. First up is MobileGym, Archive 260.5.26114. This is really clever work on creating better testing environments for mobile AI agents. The team has built a browser-hosted, lightweight environment that simulates everyday mobile phone use with high interaction fidelity. The key innovation here is that it's fully controllable and doesn't require actual devices or complex emulation setups. This matters because one of the biggest bottlenecks in developing AI agents that can actually use phones is having realistic, reproducible test environments. Mobile Gym could accelerate research into AI assistants that genuinely understand mobile interfaces. Next, there's an important paper on system scaling versus model scaling, Archive 260.5.26112. The authors argue we've been thinking about AI scaling all wrong. They say the next major bottleneck isn't just making models bigger, it's about scaling the entire system around them. They're talking about auditable, persistent, modular, and composable agent architectures. This is a shift from let's just add more parameters to let's build better infrastructure for agents to operate in. Think of it like the difference between building a bigger engine versus designing a better car. The paper pushes for what they call agentic AI harnesses, systems that can orchestrate multiple models and tools effectively. There's fascinating work on subject-driven image generation, Archive 260.5.26111. Researchers are squeezing capacity from multimodal large language models to preserve subject identity in generated images while following text instructions. The breakthrough here is they're not training new models from scratch, they're finding ways to better utilize existing MLLMs. This matters for personalization, being able to generate images of your dog, your house, your product in different contexts while maintaining visual consistency. The PRISM paper, Archive 260.5.26110, tackles multimodal continual instruction tuning. They've built what they call a plug-in reproducible infrastructure for scalable multimodal continual instruction tuning. The name PRISM is quite fitting because it's about breaking down the spectrum of multimodal learning tasks into manageable components. What makes this significant is addressing catastrophic forgetting, where models lose old capabilities when learning new ones. Their infrastructure approach provides better ways to continuously update MLLMs without degradation. On the language modeling front, there's work on looped diffusion language models, Archive 260.5.26106. Masked diffusion models have been emerging as alternatives to autoregressive models for language generation, and this paper refines how we design the training process. They're finding better ways to structure the diffusion loop, which could lead to more efficient and higher quality text generation. The appeal of diffusion models in language is they can potentially be more parallelizable than autoregressive approaches. And finally, there's a paper on using large language models for labeling code changes, Archive 260.5.26100. Code review is critical but time-consuming, and simply summarizing changes isn't enough. This research goes beyond summaries to structure-aware labeling of what changed and why. They're building systems that can understand not just the diff, but the semantic meaning and architectural impact of code changes. For anyone doing serious software development, this could dramatically improve code review workflows. Moving to industry news, Bleeping Computer reports that Anthropic's restricted Claude Mythos model may be coming to Claude Code. Now, Mythos has been this somewhat mysterious, more capable but carefully restricted variant of Claude. If it's coming to the coding interface, that suggests Anthropic is finding ways to safely deploy more powerful reasoning in development contexts. This would be significant for anyone using Claude for software engineering work. Speaking of AI in development, there's a great piece on Hacker News from Nolan Lawson titled, "Using AI to Write Better Code More Slowly." It's got over 600 upvotes and a lot of discussion. The premise challenges the speed narrative around AI coding tools. Lawson argues that using AI well actually means slowing down, being more thoughtful, using it for understanding and improvement rather than just velocity. It's a counterpoint to the AI will make you 10 times faster hype. The real value might be in writing more maintainable, better understood code, even if it takes the same amount of time or longer. Quality over quantity. The Ghost CMS vulnerability is getting serious attention. Bleeping Computer reports there's an SQL injection flaw being exploited in a large-scale clickfix campaign. Ghost is a popular open-source publishing platform used by a lot of content creators and businesses. SQL injection in a CMS is particularly dangerous because it can lead to full database compromise, authentication bypass, content manipulation. If you're running Ghost, patch immediately. This is being actively exploited in the wild. Palo Alto's Unit 42 has been busy. They've published tracking of Iranian apt group screening serpents and their 2026 espionage campaigns. Nation-state threat actors continue to be incredibly persistent and sophisticated. Unit 42 also has research on ROAD tools being used in cloud attacks, showing how legitimate Azure administration tools get weaponized by attackers. And there's updated research on the NPM threat landscape. NPM remains a major attack surface for supply chain compromises. The Laravel Lang packages hijacking that Bleeping Computer reported is another example, credential-stealing malware deployed through compromised packages. Unit 42 also published on Gremlin Stealer's evolution, noting it's hiding in plain sight using resource files. And they're tracking tampered Chef clusters via certificate and code reuse. All of this underscores that the threat landscape is extremely active, particularly around supply chain and cloud infrastructure. From Reddit's artificial intelligence community, there's interesting discussion about scientists training an AI model using an IBM quantum computer. Apparently, it answered questions correctly that the base model couldn't. We're still very early in quantum machine learning, but this suggests quantum computing might offer advantages for certain types of AI training or inference. Whether this scales or remains a research curiosity is an open question, but it's worth watching. There's also conversation on Reddit about AI becoming epistemic infrastructure controlled by a handful of private individuals. This gets to fundamental questions about who controls the systems shaping knowledge and truth in society. When a few companies control the most capable AI systems, and those systems increasingly mediate information access, we have a concentration of power with profound implications. It's not just about technology, it's about epistemology and democracy, and the Vatican has weighed in on AI. Pope Leo has issued an encyclical letter titled Magnifica Humanitas. According to multiple sources including Ars Technica, the Pope, citing Gandalf, says we must disarm AI. The letter warns about AI's potential dangers and calls for international cooperation to ensure AI serves humanity rather than threatens it. Whether you're religious or not, having major world institutions articulating concerns about AI safety and governance is significant for the broader policy conversation. Segment 7, HOMELAB and Infrastructure. Let's talk infrastructure, home labs, and the tools we use to build and manage systems. Starting with containerization and orchestration, there's been interesting discussion on Lobsters and Hacker News about a piece titled Amarchy is not a distro. It's gotten nearly 300 upvotes on Lobsters. The core argument is that your .files, your personal configuration setup, doesn't make you a distribution maintainer. There's been a trend of people treating their highly customized configurations as if they're creating new distributions, when really they're just scripting installation and setup. It's a call for humility and clarity about what actually constitutes maintaining a distribution versus just having good personal automation. For those of us in home labs doing infrastructure as code, it's a good reminder about the difference between configuration management and actually maintaining software. From GitHub trending, we're seeing interesting repository activity. There's a project called Understand Anything that's gaining traction, looks like multimodal understanding tools. Anthropic's Knowledge Work plugins repository is trending. These are plugins for Claude to better handle knowledge work tasks. There's also ECC, a repository focused on error-correcting codes. And grep-labs is showing up, looks like code search and understanding tools built on top of grep-like functionality but with AI enhancement. For those studying networking and security, someone's posted a comprehensive roadmap called AI Engineering from Scratch by Rohit Zero on GitHub. These kinds of resources are invaluable if you're trying to level up or pivot into AI infrastructure work. On Hacker News, there's significant discussion about Flatpak depending on system. This has gotten some attention, 28 points, and discussion. For Linux users, especially those who prefer system-free distributions, this is consequential. Flatpak is becoming a major application distribution mechanism on Linux. If it hard depends on system, that affects what distributions can easily support it. There are arguments both ways. System provides useful functionality for containerized applications, but it also means less diversity in the init system ecosystem. DynIP is trending on Hacker News, 113 points. It's a dynamic DNS solution with RFC 2136 support, IPv6, DNSSEC, and bring your own domain. For HomeLab folks running services behind dynamic IPS, this is exactly the kind of tool that makes life easier. Proper DNS automation with security features means you can run services at home without paying for static IPS or dealing with fragile update scripts. Mulvad VPN has posted about their exit IP VPN servers mitigation rollout. This has gotten 363 points and discussion. Mulvad continues to be one of the more privacy-respecting VPN providers, and they're transparent about their infrastructure changes. For those of us who care about privacy and use VPNs, understanding how providers handle exit nodes and IP rotation is important. There's a post about Shamir's secret sharing on Hacker News, 204 points. This is from Intez blog explaining how Shamir's secret sharing works. This cryptographic technique lets you split a secret into shares where you need a threshold of shares to reconstruct it. It's useful for key management, disaster recovery, multi-party computation. The blog post makes it accessible, and understanding these primitives is valuable for anyone doing serious security work. Reddit's HomeLab community has a pinned announcement about AI posts. With all the AI hype, they're trying to keep the focus on actual HomeLab infrastructure rather than becoming another AI discussion forum. There's great conversation about hard drive vibrations, 400 upvotes, asking whether it's a real concern or overkill to worry about. The consensus seems to be that for spinning disks in high-density setups, vibration can affect performance and potentially longevity, but for most HomeLab scenarios with a few drives, it's not worth obsessing over. Someone posted about doing optics cheaply, 218 points. Network optics, SFP modules, fiber connectivity can get expensive fast. The community is sharing sources for compatible optics that work with enterprise gear but cost a fraction of OEM pricing. This is the kind of practical knowledge that makes HomeLabs viable, finding the cost-effective path to enterprise capabilities. There's a very nice small rack HomeLab post with 510 upvotes, clean cable management, good use of space. And someone found interesting gear in Japan, small form factor networking equipment. The HomeLab community is great for inspiration and practical advice. But here's something concerning. Broadcom has removed legacy product support downloads. 253 points on Reddit. For anyone running VMware or other Broadcom products, this is frustrating. Access to old versions and documentation is critical for environments that can't immediately upgrade. Broadcom's acquisition of VMware has led to a lot of controversial decisions, and limiting access to legacy resources just adds to the pain. For home labs and smaller organizations, this might push people toward alternatives like Proxmox. Speaking of Proxmox, it continues to gain traction as a VMware alternative. With Broadcom's pricing changes and now limiting downloads, Proxmox and other open-source hypervisors are looking increasingly attractive. If you're running a home lab or small business infrastructure, it's worth evaluating whether Proxmox can meet your needs. On Reddit's sysadmin forum, there's a post that's gotten 638 upvotes. So to recap this week, 2 actively exploited Defender 0 days, an unpatched Exchange spoofing vulnerability, a BitLocker bypass called Yellowkey, and 137 CVEs from Patch Tuesday. This is not a normal week. That's a pretty good summary of the security chaos. For sysadmins, it's been a brutal week trying to prioritize what to patch first and how to mitigate actively exploited vulnerabilities while waiting for fixes. There's also discussion about Microsoft Admin Center's 318 points. The complaint is about the lack of consistency and how settings are scattered across multiple portals. Anyone who's tried to manage Microsoft 365 or Azure knows the pain. You've got different admin centers for different services, settings in multiple places, UI changes constantly. It's a user experience nightmare for IT professionals. From Ahead Inc.'s resources, there's valuable content for those doing AI infrastructure work. They've published a piece on building a production-ready AI factory. This covers the practical considerations: power, cooling, networking, storage, orchestration. Another resource is their executive playbook for liquid-cooled infrastructure for AI. As AI workloads scale, air cooling becomes insufficient and liquid cooling introduces complexity. Ahead's playbook helps executives understand the trade-offs and plan appropriately. They've also got benchmarking for single-card LLM inference on Intel Gaudi 3, showing performance for enterprise workloads. And there's a resource on turning Broadcom VCF and VKS entitlements into a modern private cloud. With the Broadcom changes, organizations are trying to figure out how to leverage what they've already paid for while building more flexible infrastructure. Ahead has resources on ServiceNow Knowledge 2026, pulling out what actually matters from the conference announcements. And they've published on reimagining IT operations with agentic AI, looking at how AI agents might transform how we manage infrastructure and respond to incidents. For security, they've got a piece called The Defenders Program for a Post-Mythos World. That's likely addressing how to think about security in a world where AI capabilities are rapidly advancing and threat actors are leveraging AI tools. This kind of practical, enterprise-focused content from Ahead is valuable for bridging the gap between emerging technology and actual implementation. If you're planning AI infrastructure, hybrid cloud, or modern operations, their resources are worth reviewing. Segment 8 Science and Space. Let's look at what's happening in science and space exploration. From NASA's breaking news, they're calling for creatives to help illuminate mission storytelling. NASA is looking for help making their missions more accessible and engaging through better visual and narrative storytelling. If you're a creative professional interested in space exploration, this could be an interesting opportunity to contribute to how NASA communicates its work to the public. NASA has set coverage for Roscosmos spacewalk outside the International Space Station. Despite all the geopolitical tensions between the US and Russia, ISS operations continue as a point of international cooperation. Roscosmos cosmonauts will be conducting extravehicular activities, and NASA will be providing coverage. It's a reminder that in space, we still find ways to work together. There's also a story about Jacqueline Kagi shaping humanity's return to the moon. She's working at Johnson Space Center on Artemis program planning and operations. The Artemis program aims to return humans to the lunar surface and establish sustainable presence. Getting the operational and logistical details right is just as critical as the rockets and landers. People like Kagi are working on how astronauts will live, work, and conduct science on the moon. NASA has published about Webb studying star clusters. The James Webb Space Telescope continues to deliver incredible science. Star clusters are important for understanding stellar evolution, population dynamics, and galactic formation. Webb's infrared capabilities let us see through dust and observe star formation regions and young clusters in unprecedented detail. And NASA's Armstrong Flight Research Center has a piece on keeping NASA flying, focusing on ground crews ensuring aircraft readiness. NASA operates a diverse fleet of research aircraft, from supersonic jets to flying laboratories. The ground crews maintaining these aircraft are critical to NASA's ability to conduct aeronautics research. It's the unglamorous but essential work that enables the science. From Ars Technica, SpaceX's Starship V3 had a mostly successful first flight, though it's still a work in progress. Each Starship test flight teaches SpaceX more about what works and what needs refinement. The iterative development approach means we see failures and successes publicly. V3 represents continued progress toward a fully reusable super heavy lift vehicle. When Starship is operational, it will fundamentally change what's possible in space exploration and development. Ars also reports that 2 Space Shuttle-era spacewalkers are entering the Astronaut Hall of Fame. These are astronauts who conducted critical EVAs during shuttle missions, building and maintaining the ISS. Their recognition highlights the human element of space exploration and the skill required for working in the vacuum of space. There's concerning news that 4 Russian satellites are now within striking distance of an ICEYE radarsat. ICEYE is a Finnish company that operates synthetic aperture radar satellites, and they've been providing imagery supporting Ukraine. Having Russian satellites maneuvering close to commercial satellites supporting Ukraine is provocative and raises questions about norms and safety in space. It's not clear what the intent is, whether it's surveillance, intimidation, or potential kinetic action, but it's a reminder that space is becoming contested. From Ars Technica's science coverage, there's a fun piece asking whether beluga whales pass the mirror test. The mirror test is used to assess self-awareness in animals. Belugas are highly intelligent, and research suggests they may recognize themselves in mirrors. But the article also asks deeper questions about what the mirror test actually tells us. Self-recognition might not be the only or best measure of consciousness or intelligence. Different species might have different types of awareness that don't map neatly onto human concepts. On a lighter note from Hacker News, there's a 2014 study that found taking a walk may lead to more creativity than sitting, and it's gotten 309 points. The research showed that walking, especially outdoors, boosts creative thinking and problem-solving. For those of us in tech who spend hours at desks, this is a good reminder to get up and move. Sometimes the best debugging happens on a walk, not staring at the screen. There's also discussion about what we lost when we stopped letting kids leave the front yard. 235 points on Hacker News. The article looks at the cost of safetyism, how restricting children's independent mobility and free play might harm their development. Kids used to roam neighborhoods, explore, take risks, and build independence. Now parenting culture and legal liability have made that rare. There's research suggesting this might contribute to anxiety, reduced resilience, and impaired executive function development. It's a complex issue balancing real safety concerns with the benefits of independence and risk-taking in childhood. From Ars Technica, there's reporting that China's shark finning could lead to U.S. seafood sanctions. Shark finning is environmentally devastating, removing sharks for their fins and discarding the bodies. It disrupts marine ecosystems and threatens shark populations. If China doesn't crack down on the practice, the U.S. might impose sanctions on Chinese seafood imports. It's an intersection of environmental policy, trade, and diplomacy. Segment 9, Business and Economy, looking at business and economic news today. Bloomberg reports the Treasury curve is flashing a higher for longer warning under Fed Chair Warsh. The yield curve shape tells us what bond markets expect about future interest rates and economic growth. If the curve is signaling higher rates for longer, that means markets don't expect rapid rate cuts, which has implications for borrowing costs, mortgage rates, business investment. For anyone with debt or planning major purchases, higher for longer means those costs stay elevated. The European Central Bank is set to lift its inflation outlook in June, according to Lane's comments to Nikkei. Even as inflation has come down from peaks, it's proving stickier than central banks hoped. If the ECB is raising its inflation outlook, that might delay rate cuts in Europe, keeping financing costs higher for European businesses and consumers. Bloomberg also reports that emerging stocks are extending their rally as the AI boom outweighs Iran doubts. Despite geopolitical uncertainty with Iran, emerging market equities are performing well, driven by optimism about AI-related growth. This shows how technology cycles can sometimes override geopolitical risk in investor sentiment. Taiwan's stock market has overtaken India to become the world's fifth largest, according to Reuters discussions on Reddit. Taiwan's prominence in semiconductor manufacturing and AI infrastructure is driving investor interest. There's reporting that 9 crypto whales dominate Polymarket disputes worth billions. Polymarket is a prediction market platform built on blockchain. A small number of large holders having outsized influence on dispute resolution raises questions about decentralization and fairness. If a handful of whales can swing outcomes on disputed bets, is the system really trustworthy? French power prices are jumping as hot weather spurs nuclear concerns, according to Bloomberg. France relies heavily on nuclear power, but high temperatures affect cooling water availability and reactor efficiency. When it's hot, nuclear plants sometimes have to reduce output, creating supply constraints and price spikes. It's a reminder that even nuclear power, often seen as reliable baseload, has weather dependencies. The Danish central bank is warning of housing risks on a price rally. After years of low rates, housing prices surged in many markets. Now with rates higher, there's concern about affordability and potential corrections. If people took on large mortgages assuming low rates would continue, rising rates squeeze household budgets and could lead to defaults or fire sales. From Hacker News and various sources, there's discussion about Ferrari's new vehicle, the Ferrari Luce. 264 points and over 500 comments. Apparently, this is Ferrari entering a new market segment or experimenting with new design language. Ferrari launches always generate discussion. They're a brand synonymous with performance and design, so any new model gets scrutiny. There's also reporting that Motorola phones have started hijacking the Amazon app to insert affiliate codes. 164 points on Hacker News. This is pretty sketchy behavior. If Motorola is intercepting app traffic or modifying apps to inject their own affiliate tracking, that's a violation of user trust and potentially illegal depending on jurisdiction. It shows how even device manufacturers might try to monetize their control over the software you run. Users should be outraged. On a related note, California is moving to exempt Linux from its age verification law after backlash. 883 points on Hacker News, nearly 400 comments. The original law apparently would have required operating systems to collect user ages, which is absurd for open-source software like Linux. There's no central entity controlling Linux distributions in a way that could enforce age verification. The backlash was swift, and lawmakers are now proposing amendments to exempt open-source operating systems. It's a case study in unintended consequences when legislators don't understand technology. Next, the CEO of retailer Next is warning of a dramatic fall in entry-level jobs. BBC reports this is due to automation and changing business models. For young people entering the workforce, fewer entry-level positions means it's harder to get that first job and start building experience. This is a broader trend as automation and AI eliminate routine tasks. Society will need to grapple with how young people build skills and enter the workforce if traditional entry points disappear. Norway is making interesting infrastructure moves. Blocks and Files reports on Norway's 2 petabytes of Huawei flash storage being used for LLM training. 273 points on Hacker News. Norway is building serious AI infrastructure using Huawei hardware despite U.S. concerns about Huawei. It highlights how different countries are making different calculus about Chinese tech vendors based on their own security assessments and economic relationships. And from a business culture perspective, there's a fascinating Hacker News discussion about Toshifumi Suzuki, founder of 7-Eleven Japan, who has died. 203 points. 7-Eleven in Japan is a completely different beast than in the US. Under Suzuki's leadership, it became a logistics and retail innovation powerhouse, pioneering just-in-time inventory, understanding local customer preferences, integrating technology. Japanese convenience stores are known for quality food, reliable service, and operational excellence. Suzuki's legacy is an example of how leadership and culture can transform a business. Bleeping Computer reports a 7-Eleven data breach exposed personal information of 185,000 people. This is the US operation, not Japan. Personal information breaches continue to be routine, and the question is always what data was exposed and whether it's being used for fraud or sold on underground markets. Segment 10, outro. That brings us to the end of today's episode of the Clovis Brief. We covered a lot of ground today. Security vulnerabilities actively being exploited, CISA's own security struggles, major AI research advancing on multiple fronts, home lab infrastructure and the ongoing Broadcom frustrations, space exploration continuing despite geopolitical tensions, and economic signals about rates and markets. Tomorrow we'll dig into any developments from the Texas Senate runoff, continue tracking the AI security landscape, and see what else breaks overnight. Thank you so much for listening. If you found this useful, please share it with someone who might appreciate it. Stay informed, stay critical, and stay secure. This is the Clovis Brief. I'm Ryan, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.